Hey everybody, it's Robin Ray Green and I'm back for another Facebook Live. I think I'm going to make this a regular thing. Tuesdays, 7 o'clock Pacific time, Facebook Live. This is for me. This is the end of my clinic day and I've gotten home and hugged my kids and had dinner, and now I'm hopping on here to do a little Facebook Live. And I just want to welcome everyone to the group. This is really awesome, over 200 new members in the last month, which is super awesome. So I want to welcome all of our new members here, and anyone that's watching live or as you hop on, feel free to say hello, whether you're live or watching the recording, and tell us where you're watching from. I always love to see where people are from. I know that we have quite a lot of parents internationally here, a lot in the US and Canada and Australia and the UK and all of that. So let us know where you're watching from. And also, as I'm talking and doing this video, if you have any questions that come up. So I just wanted to pop in here real quick because I wanted to talk about what to do, if you suspect a food is a trigger. What do you do, right? So, I think when it comes to asthma, allergies, eczema, digestive problems, and really any chronic inflammatory type of illness, there is often a food component, and foods can make things worse. And so for some of you, that might be new information to think that like food would affect your child's allergies or your child's eczema. And yet the more and more work I do, the more, I would say 9 times out of 10, we can find a food trigger that makes symptoms worse or exacerbates symptoms. But of course, nobody wants to eliminate a food that they don't need to. Nobody wants to go on a gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, soy-free, whatever diet. Nobody wants to do that stuff, but sometimes we need to do it. So what I find, though, is 9 times out of 10, when I'm working with a parent who has a child with asthma, allergies, or eczema, is a lot of times they know that their child has some kind of food sensitivity. They know that there's some food that when their child eats it, it triggers or exacerbates their child's symptoms. And, the thing is, sometimes these foods can be healthy. They're not necessarily bad foods, but in your child's body, they just aren't working. Just to give you some examples of things that have come up for parents, I've had a child that's had bananas were a trigger. I've had children where milk is a trigger. I've had children where coconut is a trigger. Eggs have been a trigger. And, so sometimes it's hard to know if the food's a trigger. So a lot of times what parents do, is a very, very common thing to do. We're like, oh, I think that's a trigger, but they don't actually eliminate that food from their child's diet. They just cut it back. And, the reality is cutting a food back is just not going to cut it when it comes to food triggers. And the other thing too is sometimes parents suspect a trigger, but then they eat the food one day and it's fine, and then they eat the food another day and it's not fine. And they're like, well, is it really a trigger? I'm not sure. So sometimes triggers can be a little bit elusive. So I wanted to address that factor. Okay. So one thing you should know too is that what your child eats has everything to do with the symptoms that they're having. If your child is on a clean diet and they're not eating any sugar and any refined carbohydrates, and they're eating all vegetables and, like healthy soups and bone broths, like you can rest assured it's probably nothing too serious in the diet. But for most kids, that is not the case. Even my own kids, it felt like a couple years to get them used to drinking like homemade bone broth. But, really changing what our children eat is super important for resolving symptoms like asthma, allergies, and eczema. And the thing is, most doctors don't know this information. They had very little training in nutrition, and certainly not in functional nutrition, where we really examine the relationship between food and inflammation and symptoms. So they're not going to really understand slow food reactions. I mean, some will of course be supportive if you tell them, if my child has dairy and they're, watery eyes and itchy and they can't swallow, of course they're going to tell you not to do dairy, although some might still could tell you to continue to do it. Who knows? But the thing is, food reactions can be delayed. And this is the really important piece of information I wanted to impart. Food reactions can be delayed anywhere from 24 to 72 hours after your child eats the food. So they may not have symptoms until 2 days later. So when you go back to figure out, like, well, she was doing fine, and then wham, her nose was totally stuffed and she was snoring all night long. You can't think about what they ate 4 hours ago. You need to be also thinking about what they ate 24 to 72 hours ago. And if this is resonating, if this is like, aha, I get it. Oh my gosh, maybe that's what's going on. Leave me a comment. Hit the like button right now. And for all of you just joining, and feel free to say hi, leave me a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I love to know where people are tuning in from. Okay, so by the time your child is symptomatic, it's really hard to tell what the food was, especially if they eat the trigger food all the time. So like if your child's trigger is eggs and you have eggs for breakfast every morning, then it's going to be hard to really distinguish what made things worse. And the other thing is if they have multiple food triggers. So for some kids, they have more than one food that's a trigger, and sometimes they eat it together. Or they have 3 or 4 low-grade triggers, but when they eat all of those together, that's when symptoms can be worsened. So it can be really, really tricky to figure out what their trigger foods are. And then once you figure them out, you need to eliminate them 100% from the diet. And the other tricky thing is sometimes the triggers aren't the foods at all. They are the additives, the preservatives, the chemicals, the artificial colors, the artificial flavors, things like that. And those are the triggers. And I've even seen kids allergic or triggered by sulfites, triggered by guar gum, triggered by xanthan gum, like triggered by some additive in the actual food itself. So that just sort of adds to the complexity of trying to untangle how the foods are relating to their symptoms. I see Molly says, is that for every food trigger or only for certain food triggers? You know what, Molly, I'm not sure what I was talking about that. So why don't you let me know what specific thing I just said, sorry. And then Teresa says, hard to find trigger foods. Yes, exactly. It's hard to find them because they can be delayed, they can be multiple, or they can be eating it all the time, so they never really get a break, so you're never quite sure if it's the trigger food. Okay, so I know a lot of moms are struggling with this. So first things first, you got to clean up your kid's diet. You got to get rid of the artificial stuff. You got to get rid of the food chemicals. You got to get rid of the processed foods, the crackers, the artificial colors, the things that kind of sneak in your pantry. Or, like I talk to a lot of moms, so sorry dads if I'm calling you out here, but like I'll talk to the moms and they're like, I don't allow this and this and this, but then I leave for one day and I come home and there's a bag of Cheetos in my pantry. And I'm like, yes, you take that bag of Cheetos and you just plop that in the garbage, right? So, it can be really, really tricky. So cleaning up is number one. And the second thing you've got to do is an elimination diet. And I know that this is easier said than done for kids, but it's one of the ways, but certainly not the only way that we can test for triggers. But when you're doing it at home, elimination diet is the way to go. So I want to know from you guys watching this, have you tried this? Have you gotten answers? Are you narrowing it down to just a couple foods? Are you having some resistance from family, from your husband or partner, or from anyone else out there? I really want to know what's going on and, what I can help you with. So let me know what you're struggling with. Let me know how things are going and leave your messages in the comments. I'm going to stick around here for another minute and see if there's any other questions, and then we'll call it a night. So, yeah, trigger foods, they're big time. Okay, so Molly asks, does a trigger food reaction occur within 72 hours for every trigger food? I've heard doctors say that gluten can cause delayed reactions, but that dairy does not. I really think that's individual to each person's immune system. I have seen kids have delayed reactions to dairy, and where it's very, very clear that that was the only trigger. I think this was actually just recently in my clinic where I had a child eating dairy, and it was like 2 days later, she was symptomatic, and it made her eczema worse. So yeah, I think dairy certainly can be a trigger. But, you know, I feel like there's still so much we don't fully understand about the immune system and how it all works. And, you know, there's the way the allergists can test, there's more than one way. Like, most allergists are in the realm of the IgE food allergy reactions, but there's more than that, and how the body can react to a food. And, you know, we're still sort of elucidating that in the research. So Teresa asks, can trigger foods change with age? Yes, absolutely. I think, sorry, I got like a hair on my lip. I think as we age, like things that can affect us, that can create new trigger foods. So things like a huge stressful life event, you know, moving, divorce, changing jobs, death of a loved one, things like that can affect our gut, and that, you know, and we can acquire new food sensitivities, antibiotics, a major illness, and there are quite a few other factors that can cause us to develop food triggers later on in life. And the main triggers, there's 6 main triggers for kids, well, really for all of us, but generally for kids, and those are, let's see if I can remember all of them: gluten, dairy, soy, eggs, peanuts, and I knew I was going to do this. There's one more. If anybody's on here that's ever taken my pediatric essentials class, you can chime in. There's a 6th one: gluten, dairy, soy, eggs, peanuts, and corn. Corn is the 6th one. Those are the main ones. And of course, corn is in everything. Dairy is in everything. You can hear my dog. She's like freaking out back there. Those are in a lot of foods. So you have to be really careful. There's really a lot that goes into doing an elimination diet. So, all right. One more question. Can trigger foods affect sometimes and sometimes not? Good question, Teresa. I like these questions. I like to think of it as like a threshold. So for some people, they can eat, like, let's say take gluten for a second. Someone can eat a small piece of bread like this at a restaurant, and it doesn't trigger a reaction. And they're like, oh, good, I can have gluten. And then the next day they have a toast for breakfast and pasta for lunch, and, you know, something else with gluten at dinner time. And now they've triggered a reaction. So sometimes there is a threshold where they can tolerate a small amount, but in larger amounts, it can be bad. Let's see. And Amy says, 1 year I took my son off dairy and he got better. He stayed off 1 year while we healed his gut. Eczema improved. After a year, he went back on it. Another year passed and eczema came back. Eliminated dairy again, but this time it made the eczema, but this time it made the eczema worse. Continued to eliminate for months and months, got worse. Went back on dairy and eczema improved. What happened here? Haven't had the eczema since. Yes. Oh, you're welcome, Teresa. You know, Amy, it just sounds like, with trigger foods, like when my kids were off of gluten, dairy, and eggs for, I don't know, gosh, like 8 years. And we've brought them back in, and they're fine. But we had never eaten them at the level that we were before. So sometimes, the gut is a tricky beast, and we have a lot of factors to consider. So sometimes when things come back, it's more complicated. We have to look at what's going on in the history, if there was like antibiotic use or medication or illness or something going on, and sometimes there can be multiple sensitivities. So it can be kind of complex to look at it. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about that, leave them in the comments, or you can private message me and we can chat. All right, everybody, that's it for tonight. I am so glad to be here with you, and I want to again welcome all of our new members into the group. It's fantastic having you all here, and I will see you guys next Tuesday. All right, bye.